Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes.
Just moments ago on Capitol Hill, the House Intelligence Committee, the hearing of the testimony of the U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland. Already, Sondland has admitted that he worked with President's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to influence Ukraine into an investigation of the presidential son candidate, Joe Biden's son, Hunter.
Weeks ago, he answered questions in a closed-door session. Then he changed parts of his testimony, and today, of course, he's back in front of the committee and with some pretty explosive revelations here. I mean, he's really thrown everybody under the bus, from the president, Mike Pence, Ron Johnson, Mike Pompeo. He said explicitly quid pro quo. He said that the idea to deal with Rudy Giuliani came directly from the president. We're going to bring in right now senior correspondent for The Hill, Mike Lillis. He is over at The Hill, at the actual Hill, covering it live for us right now. Mike, great to have you.
Hey, listen, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So tell us, what do you see as the major revelation so far this morning?
Well, you said explosive, and explosive is exactly right. I mean, this is a clear departure from what he had said behind closed doors. As you mentioned, he did come back and amend some of that. He had initially testified no quid pro quo. He was seen as a very sympathetic witness for the president and his Republican defenders here in the Capitol. But he came back and said, "Oh, wait a minute. There was. I do now remember a quid pro quo with a meeting with a top Ukrainian official in September. Now he's changing everything. Now, the tone has changed, the message has changed. He said there was a quid pro quo all along, and not only that, but everybody was in the loop. Pompeo, Mulvaney, Bolton, Giuliani, Ron Johnson, and it all came from the very top. It came from the president himself. And so, if you're a Democrat conducting this investigation and you were looking for someone who was going to make your case, they just found him in Gordon Sondland, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the Republicans defend Trump in the face of this testimony.
Right. So, Mike, as I understand it here now, this really is, I think, their last major witness that they can call on this matter. And Sondland has basically given them the ground in which they can pursue a vote within the committee and eventually to the House floor. Is that how you see it as well? Do you anticipate more people being called, or do they have what they need in order to move forward on the political football?
Oh, I think they've got what they need. John Bolton has said he would like to testify, but the Democrats are not going to wait around for the courts to rule in that case. I don't see them calling anybody else. I think this is all that they probably need, and of course they're trying to wrap this thing up by Christmas, and so they're running out of time anyway. This seems to be kind of their. I don't want to use the term silver bullet, but I mean, this is the witness that they have been waiting for all along, and I don't know who else would need to testify, unless some of these guys who Sondland is throwing under the bus want to come and defend themselves. That's another question.
Right. If Rudy wants to show up, Pompeo wants to show up, I'm sure they would welcome that testimony. Also talk about a little bit of the context here. I mean, part of the strategy from Republicans has been to sort of smear the reputation of some of these witnesses. They say, first of all, that it was just hearsay. Well, with Gordon Sondland, no, he was directly involved. He was at the heart of this thing. Second, to question, call them deep state operatives, call them never Trumpers. Well, Gordon Sondland was a major campaign contributor to Donald Trump, so that defense isn't going to work as well. Talk about that context a little bit.
Well, that's right. If there is any bias on the part of these witnesses, Sondland would certainly be biased in favor of the Republicans and Donald Trump. He gave $1 million to the campaign, longtime Republican donors, clearly sympathetic to conservative causes, and it was a Trump loyalist right up until today, as far as we can tell. I think what we're seeing is that a once reluctant witness is kind of singing like a bird, because he wants to establish his own reputation and probably wants to, certainly wants to stay out of jail. So there are a lot of legal considerations here. He is under oath. He doesn't want to perjure himself. But again, the Republicans, it's going to be interesting to see what they do here in defense of this. They had said all along that some of these witnesses, when Sondland came back and changed his testimony a few weeks ago, they said, well, that's just the opinion of one guy. That was just the perception, and he was misinterpreting the president's intentions. But now Sondland is saying, with some evidence from these emails and tweets, that no, this was coming from the president himself. And of course, he was talking to the president himself. He was on the phone. He seemed to be able to pick up a cell phone from anywhere and get Trump on the phone. And so it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans, I think, to say that there was some miscommunication here and this was coming from another channel.
Right. I think the anticipated line that I expect is that ultimately, in terms of the military aid, he said there was a presumed quid pro quo because he heard that from Rudy Giuliani. Is that right? I think he did hear it about the investigations in terms of getting a meeting at the White House, but that on the military aid in particular, that it was a presumption of a quid pro quo or a demand from the president. Is that right, Mike?
That's right. Yes, yeah. There was that nuance, and so
right.
The quid pro quo allegation began with the White House meetings. Zelensky, of course, wanted to show Moscow, wanted to show Russia that he was in close ties with the United States, who would bolster his hand in these peace talk negotiations. So initially, this was all about a phone call with the White House, one, and a meeting with the White House, two, both of which would be a show of strength for Zelensky. He very much wanted those to happen. And initially, over the summer, the aid was withheld right around the time that he was seeking those meetings. And it was only later that we learned that the aid was withheld also in terms of getting the investigations into Biden and into the 2016 election. So there's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of nuance, and I suspect that the Republican counsel is going to play in, is going to pick all of that apart and try to kind of muddy the waters and say that this is not as clear cut as it might have seemed under the Democratic questioning.
Right. Yeah, I think the other direction that they're ultimately going to go in is basically the Democrats' defense in the 90s of like, yeah, it was bad, but it's not impeachable. Washington Examiner already has a quote from a House Republican saying, even if the Democrats' fact pattern that they've laid out turns out to be 100% correct, it does not matter. And I think ultimately, look, that's what I've been predicting. That's ultimately where the Republicans have to end up here.
Yeah, there have been some who have said for weeks that yes, there was a quid pro quo, but this is just normal foreign policy. You were supposed to pressure, foreign governments to clean up their act, to make sure that there are anti-corruption measures in place, and we shouldn't be spending taxpayer dollars overseas unless they can prove that that is in fact the case. It's a little more complicated here because Trump is not asking for some policy thing in exchange. He was asking for something kind of personally, politically beneficial, and that's what the Democrats, of course, are going to dwell on. But you're exactly right. I think if the quid pro quo is unavoidable, if it's indisputable, then the Republicans are going to have to shift their defense and say there's nothing wrong with that, nothing to see here, certainly not impeachable.
Yeah,
right. Well,
Mike, thank you so much for your reporting. We'll let you get back to it. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mike. Mike, he was joining us there live from Capitol Hill. Very interesting insight there, Krystal. I mean, yeah, look, there's no question. This is bad testimony for the president. I do think it was a major error on the White House and a lot of the Republicans' front from the very beginning to say there was no quid pro quo or any of this, when it seems quite clear that there was political engagement with the Ukrainians. And ultimately, what does it really come down to? That's what we've been talking about here on the show a lot with Glenn Greenwald, Aaron Mate, and others, is that the Democrats have chosen to basically embrace the critique of the national security state, that Trump would dare mishandle Ukrainian military aid, and that is ultimately what this all comes down to. And it's a big political loser. I can tell you, the Republicans are not going to shift on this. Because, like I said from the very beginning, this is a power struggle. It is ultimately an effort by the Democrats to use whatever they possibly can, in this case, assisted by the national security state, to try and take out the president. And the Republicans, at the end of the day, are going to look at this and be like, yeah, it was bad, but we have to protect our guy because this is about power, especially headed into the 2020 election.
And I think that's where they should have started out.
That's kind of where I started out.
It is where you started out. I mean, I think that's where they should have started out, because there were just too many people involved, too many text messages, too many emails, etc., for you to not end up in this moment of being faced with, guess what, guys?
Right.
There was a quid pro quo. And also, you have to think about the way that the public thinks of this president. They don't think he's a straight arrow. It's no stretch of the imagination to imagine him like leveraging this aid in order to get what he wants vis-a-vis Joe Biden and Burisma, CrowdStrike, and these other like sort of more conspiracy theory types. Like that is not a stretch of the imagination at all. I think to most of the public, it seems blatantly obvious that something untoward happened there.
Yeah.
The question is it impeachable? And I've always thought that is what it would come down to. Not did he do it or did he not do it, but is it impeachable? And you already see
And that's what happened
Republicans
in the 90s.
moving to that position.
Yeah.
You see them telling Washington Examiner, you know what, even if this bears out 100%, doesn't matter, doesn't change anything. And you're right, that is what Democrats argued in the 90s. They said, look, it's bad, but it's not impeachable. And so I would caution Democrats, even as, this is explosive, it is different, it is very damaging to the president, it looks very bad for Republicans, but at the same time, we reported it on this morning, you have new polling showing that independents are starting to move against this impeachment inquiry. Why? It's not because they don't think the president did it. It's because they don't think that all of this is worth it.
And guess what? We live in a democracy. If the Democrats want to run on this and say, let's remove Donald Trump from office, you have that chance. Go out and make your case to the voters. However, we all know that basically the entire American public has made up their mind whenever it comes to impeachment. And it's basically split entirely along the popular vote lines of 2016. There's a reason Bernie, Warren, Biden, Buttigieg, all the other top tier candidates never talk about impeachment on the campaign trail. We've talked about it here over and over again. You go to these town halls, people are asking about health care, they're asking about like drug pricing, they're asking about a whole sorts of different issues. They're not once has impeachment come up in many of these different town halls. And so that is my challenge, which is that if you really believe this is something which a president should be removed from office for, go ahead and make your case to the American public. My bet is you're going to fall flat on your face. Nobody who's running on impeachment is going to win. You could just ask Tom Steyer how that's going to work out.
If we make this, and this is Andrew Yang's line, and he's 100% correct.
Right.
If we try, like what Hillary Clinton did, to make this election about Trump's morality and willingness to follow the norms and guardrails of democracy as imposed by the institutions here, Democrats will lose.
Yeah.
Just to reset here for a moment, we've been talking about the testimony today, fairly explosive testimony from Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland. He was a key Trump contributor, deeply involved in what was going on vis-a-vis Ukraine. And we have some of the key quotes from his opening statement. This is what stood out to us as standing out to a lot of folks today that, has made this testimony so explosive. He indicates explicitly that direction on Ukraine, specifically the need to work with Rudy Giuliani on all of this and on the quote-unquote investigations, was at the express direction of the president. But he goes further. He makes sure to make clear everyone was in the loop. Ron Johnson is implicated, Rick Perry, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Mike Pence. These people are all mentioned as being in the loop on what was going on here. Was there a quid pro quo? The answer is yes. Now, Saagar makes the point, which is an important distinction, that he's talking specifically about a White House meeting here and not about military aid, although he goes on to say that he came to believe, it was his presumption, that military aid was also caught up and tied up in this quid pro quo. Also, again, Mr. Giuliani expressing the desires directly of the President of the United States. So what Rudy was saying was coming directly from the President, and that he tried diligently to ask why the aid was suspended. That's a little bit of CYA here. I mean, look, a lot of this is he's decided he was able to watch all the testimony unfold. He was able to hear what everybody else said and see how it contradicted, and this is his attempt to avoid going to jail and to try to save his reputation, because he very much portrays himself as being the sort of, the diligent, he was acting in good faith. Maybe he didn't even always understand the context. He didn't know everything that was going on. He would have done things differently, but that it was all done in good faith and ultimately on the up and up
A little bit
with
hard
regard
to
to him.
believe. I think he saw the chips
Look at
down.
CYA.
He knew he had to go in front of the House and testify under oath. He doesn't want to go to jail, so he's trying to put himself as a little bit of a Boy Scout. I think things will be it'll be interesting to see the questioning the Republicans undertake here. But look, the damage is done. I mean, here's the other thing. These were all written for the express purpose of TV bites. As somebody who's seen this all happen, right? Like, was there a quid pro quo? The answer is yes. That's short. He knows it'll play on cable all day long. So it seems to me that there was a clear turning on the president here. That's exactly what happened.
For sure.
And it was a coordinated. And look, I mean, people who do this know that, Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the president of the United States. These are all written in short form places, specifically in order to play to the cable news set. I think he gave them exactly what he wanted, largely to take the pressure off of himself. Now, look, do I think he's telling the truth? I don't actually know. Generally, it seems that things are working out. It all comes down to the White House defense on this and to the Republican defense. We've talked about it here. It is going to trend in the direction of, look, yeah, there was some weird stuff going on here with Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and the Ukrainian government. Ultimately, if you think that is enough in order to remove President Trump from office less than a year out from a general presidential election in which he's on the ballot, I think you're out of your mind. And I think that's a pretty intellectually sound position to be.
Remember Mick Mulvaney?
Yeah.
Get over it?
Yeah, get over it.
Yeah, expect very
Right.
much that's the direction that things are headed in. But it is going to be pretty interesting to hear how the Republicans on that pit, because they have to react to this kind of in real time.
Yeah, they do.
They
We're
don't
gonna
have
see
the
what's gonna
chance
happen.
to gather and get all the talking points. So it's going to be pretty interesting to hear their take.
Yep.
But again, bottom line comes down to, do you think this is an impeachable act or not? And I think that'll be the real question facing the American people. Thank you for joining us for our live coverage.
Thanks so
We'll see you
much.
back here tonight for live debate coverage. Big day. See you later.